20 Priesthood Laws and Evidences. Chapter 8 Part 1 of the Church and the Priesthood by Ogden Kraut. Ordinances instituted in the heavens before the foundation of the world, in the priesthood, for the salvation of men, are not to be altered or changed. All must be saved on the same principles. Joseph Smith. TPJS. Page 308. Why was it that the Lord did not restore the gospel and priesthood to one of the many churches already in existence? The answer is probably because he knew the ministers and their congregations would not accept them. This is evidenced by the fact that after Joseph Smith established the priesthood with its doctrines and ordinances, other churches combined to oppose him and the restored gospel. However, preserving and maintaining these priesthood laws and ordinances have proved to be just as difficult as restoring them. When the U.S. Constitution was originally adopted, a lady asked Benjamin Franklin what they had given to the people. He responded, "A republic if you can keep it." Undoubtedly the prophet Joseph Smith felt the same, that he had given the saints the fullness of the gospel and the authority of the priesthood. But could they keep it? A church should be subordinate to priesthood authority, but unfortunately churches have a tendency to expect the priesthood to function only within their framework. The 110 important question is, can men within the church make significant changes in priesthood laws and ordinances and still possess the priesthood? This chapter contains criteria on 20 different doctrines and principles that will show their close connection to the priesthood as compared to the LDS Church. Information provided on these important gospel subjects will show that priesthood laws remain the same whether or not the LDS Church changes or rejects them. The LDS Church, an appendage of the priesthood, common consent missionary work, garment of the priesthood, gifts and powers of the priesthood, ordinances of the priesthood, rebaptism, conferring and ordaining to priesthood, celestial plural marriage. Babylon versus Zion, united we stand, divided we fall, the persecuted and the persecutors, deceptions and delusions, race restrictions, use or lose keys of priesthood, the LDS Church and the kingdom of God, kings and queens, the first and second comforter, the redemption of Zion, 20 the only true God. 111. The LDS Church, an appendage of the priesthood. Creationists and evolutionists continue to argue about which came first, the chicken or the egg. But historians do not have that same problem regarding the church and the priesthood. It is an established historical fact that the priesthood existed before the church and was actually the power and authority that created the church, rather than the church creating the priesthood. We could compare it to the church as an automobile and the priesthood as the builder of the automobile. That which is created is not greater than the creator. Further, the Lord explained, the offices of elder and bishop are necessary appendages belonging unto the high priesthood. D&C 84 hours and 29 minutes. All other authorities or offices in the church are appendages to this priesthood, referring to Melchizedek priesthood. D&C 107. 5. Professor Sidney B. Sperry described these appendages as attachments or adjuncts. D&C Compendium. Page 557, which indicates that the church is merely an attachment to the priesthood. Daniel Webster defined appendage as any subordinate or external organ or part, such as a branch of a tree or the tail of a dog. Webster's New World Dictionary. Thus, all church offices and auxiliaries are merely appendages or attachments to the priesthood because the priesthood is the greater power. Charles Rich added that. 112. Pertaining to sealings and endowments, we understand that the priesthood is greater than the temple. JD 19. 163. Thus it follows that since the church is created by the priesthood, it, too, is an appendage of the priesthood. We live in a day when LDS Church membership is considered to be more important and greater than the priesthood. Men worry more about church membership than they do about priesthood laws and principles, which should be their utmost priority. Why would men compromise and make concessions which would jeopardize their priesthood? Simply because they place church position above priesthood authority and erroneously think that priesthood is an appendage to the church. President J. Reuben Clark made a very important clarification on this subject when he said, "The priesthood is essential to the Church, but the Church is not essential to the priesthood." Imp. Era 39, 134. He infers that the Church cannot exist without the priesthood, but the priesthood, being the greater of the two, can exist without the Church. According to the prophet Joseph, now the great and grand secret of the whole matter, and the summum bonum of the whole subject that is lying before us, consists in obtaining the powers of the holy priesthood. D&C 128 hours, and 11 minutes. And from Heber C. Kimball, we receive the priesthood and power and authority. If we make a bad use of that priesthood, do you not see that the day will come when God will reckon with us, and he will take it from us and give it to those who will make better use of it? JD 6, 125, 113. Thus, when there is a discrepancy or conflict between the laws of the Church and the laws of the priesthood, it is a much wiser choice to follow the priesthood rather than one of its appendages. Common consent. According to revelations from God, the LDS Church is to be governed and controlled by the vote of its members. Officers are to be voted upon before they take office. In April 1830, the Lord clearly explained, "No person is to be ordained to any office in this church, where there is a regularly organized branch of the same, without the vote of that church." D&C 20, 65. And 3 months later the Lord further stated that all things must receive the vote of the people, which would include doctrines, revelations, etc. And all things shall be done by common consent in the church, by much prayer and faith. For all things you shall receive by faith. D&C 26. 2. See also 28 hours, and 13 minutes. As an example of this procedure, let's review the history of the Articles of Faith. In March of 1842, Joseph Smith responded to a letter written to him by John Wentworth, the editor and owner of the Chicago Democrat. Wentworth wanted to know a brief history and the beliefs of the Mormons. Included in Joseph's lengthy response were what has become known as the Articles of Faith, which has become the most published document of beliefs of the Mormons. Millions of copies of these articles have been published in a variety of formats. However, it wasn't until General Conference of October 1890 that they were actually voted upon and adopted as official doctrine of the Church. 114. Monday, October 6, 1890. Bishop Orson F. Whitney first read the Articles of Faith, which included a declaration by church members that they believed in obeying, honoring and sustaining the law. While the articles had been a part of Mormon theological literature for half a century, it seemed a convenient time to sustain them as the official rule of conduct for the Church. This was done on a motion by Apostle Franklin D. Richards. Solemn Covenant. B. Carmen Hardy. Page 135. Ironically, at the same conference plural marriage was voted out, while just 38 years before 1852, it had been voted and sustained as a true doctrine of the Church. Hence, both good and bad men, true and false doctrines, can be accepted or rejected by the vote of church members. All things in the Church must be done by common consent. This makes the people, men and women, under God, the rulers of the Church. The responsibility and work of the Church are not only for, but by, the people as a whole. Priesthood and Church Government. John A. Woodstow. Page 234. Elder Bruce R. McConkie explained the consequences of common consent. There is, of course, the democratic principle of common consent whereunder the people may accept or reject what the Lord offers to them. Acceptance brings salvation. Rejection leads to damnation. Doctrinal New Testament Commentary. McConkie. 1. 538. H. Roberts concurred and further explained, suppose a law is promulgated before the Latter-day Saints, a revealed principle of truth is submitted for their accept on our end, then, in the exercise of that liberty, which God has conferred upon His Church, they reject it. The question is then asked, What remains? 115. Why the truth remains. The action of the Church has not affected that in the least. It is just as true as if the Church had a. Why the truth remains. The action of the Church has not affected that in the least. It is just as true as if the Church had accepted it. Our acceptance or rejection does not make or mar the truth. It simply determines our own relationship to that truth. If we reject the truth still remains. Human conduct does not affect the truth. Defense of the Faith and the Saints. Roberts. 2. 518. And also from Elder Roberts. And if they reject it, the truth still remains, and it is my opinion that they would not make further progress until they accepted the rejected truth. Imp. Era 8. 363. In the common consent process, however, if someone casts a negative vote against any of the Church general authorities or their programs, it could lead to serious questioning, threats, being escorted from the tabernacle and/or being required to sign a test oath. Joseph Musser wrote of such repercussions. Why vote at the conferences if one is compelled to vote affirmatively? If all things are to be done by common consent, how then can a few be singled out and forced to sign a statement of acceptance, without qualification or explanation? The present attitude of the leaders is that of the modern gangster. You may use your inalienable right to vote as you see fit, but you must vote for me. Truth 1. 135. Unfortunately, those who have voted for eternal and unchangeable principles, ordinances and laws of the priesthood and would not compromise, have been excommunicated from the LDS Church. Church members find themselves in a precarious position. Do they sustain the gospel of the priesthood or the gospel of the Church? One cannot help but 116. Wonder what would have happened if by common consent, Church members had voted not to make changes in doctrine and ordinances. In our 11th article of faith we claim the privilege of worshiping God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege except if you are a Mormon and voice a negative vote. Church members can vote by common consent for changes in ordinances and doctrines and policies, and the majority vote will stand. However, a man holding the holy priesthood has no voting privileges for or against priesthood laws and ordinances that are eternal and authored by God himself. He must conform to these priesthood laws or else prove unworthy of the priesthood and risk the loss of it. Therein lies a significant difference between common consent in the Church and predetermined, eternal priesthood laws. Missionary work. When Jesus began his ministry, he called others to go with him as missionaries. He told them, "Provide neither gold, nor silver, nor brass in your purses, nor scrip for your journey." Matt 10, 9-10. Luke recorded, "And he said unto them, Take nothing for your journey, neither staves, nor scrip, neither bread, neither money." Luke 9, 3. These were Christ's instructions to his 12 apostles. Luke 9, 1. As well as to the 70. Luke 10, 1. Who were to be the missionary force of the Church. These missionaries were sent two and two before his face into every city and place, whither he himself would come. Luke 10, 1. In our dispensation, as the first LDS elders began returning home from their missions in April of 1832, the prophet Joseph received a revelation, D&C 84, that 117. Seemingly consisted of two parts, the first on the holy priesthood and the second on missionary work. However, the introductory paragraph for that section states, the prophet designates it a revelation on priesthood, which essentially means that both parts pertain to the priesthood. From verses 6 to 42 it discusses the holy priesthood, and from verse 61 to the end, v. 120. It specifically discusses missionary work. In this revelation, the Lord reinstituted the program of traveling without purse or scrip as did the ancient apostles. Therefore, let no man among you, for this commandment is unto all the faithful who are called of God in the Church unto the ministry, from this hour take purse or scrip, that goeth forth to proclaim this gospel of the kingdom. D&C 84, 86. Thus, from 1832 until after the turn of the century, this priesthood law and procedure was also the established rule of the LDS Church. Why was missionary work without purse or script the accepted way of the Lord? Apostle George Q. Cannon beautifully answered this question. Every young man who goes out, as in the case of our young men who are constantly going, goes without purse or script. What is the result? They have to feel after God. If they want a pair of pantaloons, they have to ask God to obtain them. If they want a meal of victuals, they have to exercise faith on this account. In sending out my sons to preach the gospel, or having them go, I would not give them $1 to go with. And while I am on this subject, I will say, the father who gives his sons money to go and preach the gospel, does them the greatest injury he can do. I would not do it if I had millions at my disposal. I would not give them $1. Let them go out and feel after. 118. God, and obtain a knowledge of God, through faith and through mighty prayer. When a man is hungry, when a man is without friends, when a man has no place to sleep, he will, if he believes in God, and his gifts, be certain to go to him and ask him to furnish that which he needs. And when his prayers are answered, he has greater faith next time. George Q. Cannon, JD 24, 345-346 inches. Gradually, however, parents began sending a little money to their sons in the mission field. Then came programs for the elders' quorums to set up missionary funds to assist the missionaries. Eventually, rules were instigated that new missionaries had to have a certain amount of money to enter the mission field and also have proof that he could be sustained by a specific amount of money while he was a missionary. What a complete change in the financial arrangements for missionaries. Traveling without purse or script became a lost part of the past. To recap its history and significance, it was practiced at the time of Christ and was restored in our dispensation in the very same manner and with the same word expressions. It was included in the D&C with other items that pertained to priesthood work. It was given to the LDS Church as a priesthood law. The Lord said it was to be instituted from this hour forth without any indication that it should be changed or discontinued. He never gave a revelation changing or stopping its practice. It was not given by way of preparatory instruction, an experimental effort, or because they were too poor to go any other way. The Lord said it was a commandment, a perpetual, unchangeable law of the priesthood. 119. Nevertheless, this commandment and priesthood law has been changed by the Church to be more accommodating and fit into their modern program. Instead of the Church conforming to this unchangeable law of the priesthood, garment of the priesthood, ancient Israel had holy garments, and Jesus and his apostles also referred to them. It appears that the gospel of the priesthood should be accompanied by garments of the priesthood. Although the Catholic Church has apostatized from many gospel principles, they still retain vestiges and imitations of the originals. For instance, the priest's garments and robes are modified, colored and styled differently, but they still bear a significance symbolizing sacred priesthood ties. Protestant churches abandoned the idea of the priesthood and a priesthood garment, along with other principles and ordinances, when they rejected Catholicism. For nearly 2,000 years there was no true priesthood nor priesthood garment. Early Christian prophets had foretold of this apostasy, but prophesied there would be a restitution of all things. The prophet Joseph Smith, along with restoring the gospel, the temples and priesthood authority, also restored the holy priesthood garment. Its style and symbolic markings were specifically given by revelation. However, in a few years members began to change and alter their priesthood garments. This caused President Joseph F. Smith to declare, in order that such people may imitate the fashions, they will not hesitate to mutilate that which should be held by them the most sacred of all things in the world. They should hold these things that God, 120, has given them sacred. unchanged and unaltered from the very pattern in which God gave them. Let us have the moral courage to stand against the opinions of fashion, and especially where fashion compels us to break a covenant and so commit a grievous sin. Imp. Era 9. 813. However, opinions of fashion eventually won, and in 1923 an announcement was made to church members that a new modified garment would be permitted. It was not a stern rule, a commandment or based upon revelation, but it was a welcomed option for most of the wearers. The change in style is permitted for various good reasons, chief among which are promotion of freedom of movement in the body and cleanliness. Formerly the sleeves were long, reaching to the wrists. Permission is therefore granted by the First Presidency to shorten the lower garment. Also, buttons are permitted to take the place of the tie strings. Such alterations are optional with each individual, and by no means compulsory. Church officials desire it understood. S.L. Tribune. June 4, 1923. 10 days later, June 14, 1923, the First Presidency sent out a letter addressed, "Dear Brethren," stating that after careful and prayerful consideration it was unanimously decided that the following modifications may be permitted. They also advised the brethren to remember that the garment is the emblem of the holy priesthood designed by the Lord as a covering for the body. It was signed by H.J. Grant, Charles W. Penrose and A.W. Ivins. This was just one of many gospel changes that increased after the 1890 Manifesto, and many justifications were given, such as that provided by Apostle Stephen L. Richards. 121. I hold it entirely compatible with the genius of the Church to change its forms of procedure, customs, and ordinances in accordance with our own knowledge and experience. S.L. Tribune. April 10, 1932. There is nothing wrong with changing church procedures, policies and customs, but to try to change eternal laws of the priesthood is ludicrous. This was the argument presented in the councils of Catholicism down through the centuries, but we call their changes apostasy. It is difficult to see any distinction. The history of the priesthood garment in the LDS Church paints a clear picture. There was just one revealed pattern that existed for nearly 100 years. Then an abbreviated and modified pattern was provided as an option for wearing outside the temple, often referred to as the street garment. Thus, either garment could be worn outside the temple, but only the priesthood garment inside the temple. Then came the option to wear either pattern inside the temple. Then came a directive stating that the old pattern could not be worn outside or inside the temple. An order was made that the old-style garments would no longer be manufactured. Anyone wearing the old-style garment was considered an apostate. This gradual change in the priesthood garment was obviously not the result of a revelation or a series of revelations from God, but rather because of personal convenience and popular demand. 122. The LDS Church has the right to make a street garment if they so desire. It was optional with the leaders and members alike and was proper under the rules of voting by common consent. However, as part of the priesthood laws and ordinances, this garment cannot be changed or altered. According to Brigham Young, is there a single ordinance to be dispensed with? Is there one of the commandments that God has enjoined upon the people that he will excuse them from obeying? No, not one. No matter how trifling or small in our own estimation, no matter if we esteem them non-essential, or least or last of all, the commandments of the house of God, we are under obligation to observe them. Discourses of Brigham Young, page 341. As with other ordinances and doctrines, the Church has the right to change the temple garment, but upon making those changes it ceases to be a priesthood garment, and becomes a garment for the LDS Church.